This morning with Wayne Wolf, who has a long and illustrious career with the NCBC and is now the retired clerk of Alaska. Wayne, thank you for agreeing to speak with me, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your history with the NCBC. But let's start with this. When did you first come to the bankruptcy court?
I accepted a position in Alaska in August of 1985. I had at that time been working for the state court out of Fairbanks as clerk of the trial courts and the assistant area court administrator. I spent 22 and a half years there before retiring in December of 2007.
So you actually came to the bankruptcy system as the clerk?
Yes, I did.
All right. When did you join the NCBC?
Same year. I found out there was an organization called the NCBC. At that time, it was just a group of clerks. There were no deputies involved. And I got a number and a name, and I made a phone call. I sent some information off, and I became an NCBC member.
And why did you think that it was important to be a member of the NCBC?
Well, I looked at what the bankruptcy system was at that time, and it was a little bit convoluted. It was just coming out of the 84 amendments and the act issues and all kinds of things. And I was coming out of a state system, although the state of Alaska had accepted and used the federal rules of civil procedure. The federal court also did use them, and it worked out. I thought I knew a little bit about federal court, but I didn't. I found when I got to the bankruptcy court that what little information I had or availability under the federal rules basically applied to adversaries and not very much to the estate aspect. It was more like the probate court at the state court level than it was an adversarial type court.
Well, once you decided to join the NCBC, you have the distinction of holding more offices and spending a longer time in the administration of the NCBC than any other person. Let's go through all of the offices you held. And
most of that was by accident, but yes, it worked out that way.
Now, your first position with the NCBC was what?
Or just as a member.
All right.
And then in '88, I ran for Board of Governors, bearing in mind that there wasn't a whole lot of people in the NCBC, but I did get elected along with Jeff Aberson, who was a young clerk as well, young in the respect that he was new to the system. And he is younger than I am, actually. And I started functioning as a board member, working on NCBC business. And I served my 2 years. Then I think there was a little hiatus in there where I wasn't doing anything. And then I ran for treasurer. Actually, let me back up. I was on the board, and the treasurer's position moved up to president. That was Brenda Hart. And so they appointed me interim treasurer. And I served through Brenda's term and then put my hat in the ringer I was already past the board term. I put my hat in the ringer and was elected to the treasurer's slot. I held that position for 5.5 years, which is a bit unusual in the history of NCBC. But the way it worked out, we were in between elections, and then I was elected, and then when I was supposed to step down, they asked me to stay on again because they needed some continuity. I actually got a second term out of it. It's again more by accident than on purpose. And that went to total of about 5.5 years when I actually ran for the president-elect position.
And you were president-elect for, I believe, 1 year?
No, it was 2 years.
Was it 2 years?
Term. Yeah.
And
that had changed in that time frame. It used to be a 1-year term.
all right.
But it was
president for 2 years.
Yeah, it was changed because of continuity issues. By the time you really got your feet in the ground and your hands in the dough, you were out of the kitchen. So 2 years seemed more realistic. They changed the bylaws, and most of the positions, including the treasurer, became a 2-year hold. And vice president-elect was sort of a gopher position. The president did everything, and you just helped out. But the purpose was to be able to understand the status of everything when you really were elected president with a 2-year probation learning curve before you actually got the job. But it worked out well. By the time you turned into the president, you actually had a firm working knowledge of what's been going on with the organization for the full 2 years. Very beneficial to me, I know, when I took over as president.
And all of that time in actually serving as an officer or board member of the organization, I'm sure you saw lots of issues come up.
Oh, that's
How about talking with me about some of those?
Well, as you know, the NCBC was an organization of clerks only. And when I joined it, I was interested in elbow bumping and picking brains of the existing clerks, those who knew what was going on, because I was still relatively new and I had to learn a lot about bankruptcy. And there were, other than my judge, who I had a rather interesting relationship with, I didn't have any other source of actual involvement with the bankruptcy community. I was kind of learning as I went. And in Alaska in '85, that was the beginning of a very big downturn in the economy. And we went from filing 300 cases a year to filing 1,800 cases a year. And I went from a staff of 4 people to a staff of 17 or 18. And you just don't hire people off the street with bankruptcy knowledge, at least at that time, date and time. You hired a person who didn't know anything about anything. They may have had some state court or some legal experience in an attorney's office, but you had to teach them everything. And if you didn't know what was going on, it was real hard to bring staff up to speed. So it was an awkward time. It was a tough time to become a new clerk in bankruptcy. For me, I was pretty stressed during the first couple of years. But as things settled down and my people became a little bit more trained and I understood more about what was going on, things leveled off and I got more comfortable. That was my Alaska experience. Then it's been pretty stable in Alaska for my term. The next thing that I think that was, and that wasn't really an NCBC thing, more as a personal thing. I didn't do a lot with NCB other than just the support aspect. The early years of being on the board was interesting. We'd just make decisions. We didn't really do a lot. We were more of a lobbying organization than we were anything else, trying to get the members of Congress and just protect ourselves. There were issues out there where a number of the district courts were pushing heavily for a consolidated circumstance. Other courts who preferred the separation of bankruptcy from the district court. As I said, we were coming off the Act and the 84 amendments and all of the confusion that surrounded that, including how do you move a bankruptcy through the system and what happens with it when you get done. So we were a lobbying organization, and we met and talked about those kind of things, how to protect ourselves, bankruptcy, and how to remain independent. Then it changed as time went on. we offered the membership to the deputies. That was a rather heated experience. There were a good number of clerks who felt very strongly that they didn't want the deputies into the organization for a couple of reasons. First of which would be that the deputy clerks, by their very presence in the organization, would diminish the political power of the group. Instead of it being a group of high-level clerks, it was now clerks and a mix of court employees. I never quite understood that, but that was one of the principal arguments. And there was a concern over the sheer number of deputy clerks that would join in the voting aspects. One vote, one person. There was only 71 clerk positions. And of course, if you look at the number of deputies that have come on board, they certainly outrank us number-wise. That issue never did come to a point where a deputy clerk was elected president of the organization. It was a concept, it was a worry, there was a lot of disagreement and argument about it. It almost got put into the bylaws that only a clerk could run for the position of president. We managed to keep that out because we figured, well, you're either giving equal ability to the people or you're not. And so bylaws, I saw the written bylaw that said that it could only be held by a clerk. That was scrapped. And in all the years that we've done that, I don't know of a deputy clerk running for the position of president. They are content to work in the other levels of the organization, and the candidates primarily have always been clerks. Where we go now?
Well, let's talk about one issue that I know that came up during the time that you were one of the officers of the NCBC, and that is the first reduction in force.
It was called equalization. That was the AO term for it. In truth and in fact, it was a move to rebalance monies and positions with the district court. Bankruptcy was growing rapidly. As I said, I went from 4 people to 17. And the district courts were just kind of bumping along like they do. They have exciting cases, they have big cases, but they don't have numbers like we have. And they don't have the swings that we have. So the formulas the administrative office felt had gotten out of whack, and that we were getting positions that we didn't need, and it was taking monies from the district court. And the structure was such that the district court, we are even at a district court by statute, and the child could not outshine the parent, so to speak. And equalization occurred. It was the first time that the courts had ever had a layoff of any type for any nature. And it was very hard for everybody to understand that it was actually going to happen. And it was dealt with in a number of different ways. Some clerks shared information as it came out with their deputies. Others just hit the ball and didn't discuss it at all. I remember, at least in one case, a clerk who hired up in the face of the equalization and then laid off 30 people 6 months later. But it was a tough time. At that time, Beth Dick was the president. I was the treasurer. And she made me a chair of a personnel committee where I pulled together a number of people from various walks of life in the bankruptcy court as far as what their expertise was. And we sat down and we hammered out some alternatives and some suggestions for the administrative office on how they could do the reorganization or the equalization with the least impact to the members of the bankruptcy court. And they weren't anything that were great or wonderful. They were simple suggestions like allowing people to know in one court that was laying off which jobs were available in other courts, allowing them to transfer between districts if they wished. We talked about the possibility of furloughs, where if it was real close, you could have a voluntary reduction in force where everybody gave up a certain amount of time to preserve the sanctity and the numbers of their district. We talked. Job sharing was one of those things. The transfer between courts didn't just go to the bankruptcy level. There were actual transfers between bankruptcy and district in some cases, and probation, and in some cases actually the state court. It depended upon the circumstance. It was a very difficult time. I mean, the mindset of everybody that worked for the court, including the judges, was that you never got laid off if you went to work for the federal court system. Hadn't happened in 200 and some odd years, and it's not going to happen now. Well, it did, and it was hard. It was not accepted well by a lot of people, and following that experience, of course, we've seen several other budget issues that have caused us to realign staff. We've had increases and decreases. We've had staffing formulas that forced reductions or ramped up hires. And all of those future and later happenings, we did a good enough job with our recommendations, and they were adopted by the administrative office, at least in some form. Maybe not identically as we proposed them, but in some form. That those the criteria and the premises that we put forth have been used through all of those other layoffs. I mean, we created a system, or at least a support system, for future stuff just out of that one instance. And it looks like with future budgets coming up, talking about shortages and austerity with the budgets the way they are and the deficit spending, we may have another round of those things occurring.
Well, what about during your term as president of the NCBC? What issues came up within the courts that the NCBC addressed, or may for whatever reason have decided not to address?
Well, we actually went through the equalization. I was a clerk at that time, and I went through two other RIFs, reduction in forces. I used what tools we had, and they actually, the administrative office gave us some additional help with buyouts and early outs and some of the things that in our meager attempt was back to deal with equalization. So there has been at least some success through the NCBC as an organization. The president of the NCBC is an ad hoc member of the Clerks Advisory Committee, and whoever that individual happens to be sits on that committee. It gives you an opportunity to have some input into what they're planning to do. You can't change what they want to do, but you can sometimes moderate or deflect the severity of or the impact of what the administrative office may or may not do because of budget issues and so on. It gave us a forum. We were recognized as a viable organization. I went through the other RIFs, as I said, in my clerkship. We survived some hard times, and I personally had to fire a number of folks that had been with me for a long time. There just wasn't any wiggle room for anything. It was just that it was too big a hit for me to absorb without actually losing the individual totally. But there are other things in the NCBC. I think the ability to sit with the other clerks in the Clerks Council with the BCAD group was probably one of the big things that helped us out. Gave us a voice, gave us some legitimacy, and it certainly did help us. The fact that the bankruptcy court has grown, or the NCBC and the bankruptcy court support has grown as it has, including we went from a small group of clerks to a group of clerks and some deputy clerks who came sometimes on their own nickel, with or without any support from the courts. We finally lobbied the administrative office to allow us to partially fund deputies coming to the conference based on the educational levels, and the format of what the conference was going to be. Our conference has changed too, from a kind of a social gathering of folks to actual working educational an educational based process. It included, once we got started, the assistance of BCAD in presenting and training. We had the Federal Judicial Center come in and start doing things with us. That opened doors to other training factors for us. And then they gradually relaxed the spending issues to the point where some courts can fully fund now. There's still an issue out there whether it's allowed 100% or whether it's not allowed. Some clerks think the deputies should have some skin in the game if they're going to be gone for a week and come to the conference. But that's helped a lot, and that of course swelled our attendance substantially. Once there was some funding available, instead of one person or two people coming from a court to the organization and conference, people like Richard Helsel and Barry Landers and some of those others were sending 10, 11, 12, 14. You have a number of the larger courts doing that, and then suddenly you're talking attendance numbers in the 200s to 300s. This particular conference is 560. So you can see how that would have grown over a period of time, and the importance of the AO funding allowance. However, I have to digress a little bit. I'd like to go back to the presidency of Mike Webb. Mike was our president. I was his treasurer because of that long term I had in the middle. I was the treasurer to everybody, it seemed. We had an opportunity. The Ninth Circuit had started a disability program started in the Ninth Circuit for the Ninth Circuit court employees, and got bigger and was gradually going out and working through the other courts because there wasn't any disability plan of any nature other than a Social Security or disability by retirement by disability. So you didn't really have anything else out there. So the Ninth Circuit had managed to get it started. However, they felt uncomfortable about being in the insurance business. And they were looking to give it up and find some other entity to sponsor it. Well, I was in the Ninth Circuit, and I talked to Terry Nafisi, who was then the deputy circuit executive, about the problem and the issues. And Mike and I spoke about maybe NCBC being the sponsor. And we met with the then Gallagher representatives and talked about what they would do, what we would have to do, what our responsibilities were. We had a few of our attorney clerks do a little research and ask some questions. And we decided to go forward because it became an opportunity to have self-sustaining funding. It worked simply this way. If people bought a disability policy, a certain amount of premium they paid every time they made a premium payment came back to us in the form of like a commission. And that really helped out, along with the funding from the administrative office as far as bringing attendance up. The other thing that occurred out of that, once we became an insurance entity for our employees, we started looking at things that the federal government didn't provide. There was a need for, in some cases, other insurance. You only had choices of 2 or 3, like in Alaska. You didn't have 9 or 10. And you had just these certain government entity insurances for your family and medical and doctor. We created an insurance policy that court employees could buy that wasn't Blue Cross, wasn't mail handlers, wasn't any of those others. You had a different choice and could pick and choose. We created a dental plan. This happened over a period of time. It wasn't just all at once, but over the years. And Mike started it, and I was involved with it. We took the disability initially, and then the rest of my tenure as treasurer and in the various presidential, vice president, elect president, past president, I worked on bringing in the other stuff, the other insurances, and we provided things that the administrative office couldn't, the federal government couldn't, and it got pretty popular. I mean, it wasn't just the court system; it went out marshal services. I mean, if you were a federal employee and wanted to buy our insurance, we had the bylaws and we had the insurance rules established where anybody can come in and buy NCBC dental. And so that was, again, an extension of funding, which has helped us out. We worked very hard, and I'm going to back up again. During my early years in the Office of Treasurer, we started to try to sell advertising in the conference books. Well, we talked to software companies, we talked to this, and we talked to that, and we talked to Bank of America, who came on board, by the way, and has been a stalwart supporter for a number of years now, from the very beginning. And we were trying to get them to give us a couple of $100, $300 for a half-page ad in the conference thing. And we would get maybe 6 or 7 people or entities that would buy advertising to help us offset the cost of the conference. And then some of these entities became larger supporters. And the $200 and the $300 at a time, which didn't get us very far, became $2,500, $5,000. And if you look at any of the current booklets, you'll see the major funding and the major donors who have sort of adopted us. They're now almost the same people all the time making that support effort. They'll guarantee, they'll pick up the business lunch with us. They'll pick up a breakfast or 2. Things that we couldn't do on our own because of the cost. Hotel food is very expensive. And having it served at a hotel is worse than what it costs to get it on an airplane if you broke it out. So those things all happened during my tenure in the organization at one stage or at one position or another. And I think the most memorable, and I was involved with a lot of stuff, including the deputy clerks coming on board, finding the funding sources. But at the second half of my term as president, I met Maureen Connors from MSU, and she came to us, the board, with a proposal to offer an educational package that would include a certification of certain subjects, or if somebody went through the entire proposal and we hadn't worked out all of the criteria yet. But MSU wanted to do a College Without Walls type program that would end up in a degree for anyone who wished to go through it. She was starting with the court organizations. She saw this as a lacking field, and there was only one other place, unless you went on to be a lawyer and you didn't get very much information in court administration. In law school, there were a couple of public administration courses that you could take that touched on a little bit. What we do is so diverse that you can't really go anywhere and get a full degree in what you do. There just wasn't anything there. I myself was a graduate of the Institute of Court Management. I was the 270th graduate. That was a group of people that were put together under LEAA funds back in the 70s. It was a government grant and Ford grant and Ford Foundation, where they were trying to train people. They had judges, they had lawyers, they had all the others, but they didn't have anybody that could really run a court. They had recognized the need to have judges do the judging, and to take a judge out of the judge's role to try to do an office manager's type job just wasn't working in a lot of places. And the judges didn't have the talent. I mean, they were not good administrators. They were good judges, they were lawyers, they were everything else, but they didn't come in with any credentials or knowledge. So they created the Institute for Court Management, and that lasted a number of years, and they graduated thousands of people. And then gradually the LEAA funding disappeared. The faculty that had established that morphed over to the University of Colorado, and they now have something like a master's program in judicial administration that you can, but you have to go through this whole process in the University of Colorado and get your base BS or BA and then move on. But Marine offered it as an opportunity to take people who are field ready, those that are actually doing the job, and teach them the added skills that they wouldn't get into by working a day-to-day job in the court system. Unless you had a mentor that could take you through everything all the way along, you'd never, and there's no certification, doesn't open doors, can't put it on a resume. So I saw this as an opportunity. I saw it as a need. I realized that we were having what they call the brain drain, and the institutional knowledge just getting ready to go out the door. All the clerks were ready to retire, or getting ready to retire, or would retire within a period of 5 to 7, 8 years. And when you look behind to see who could come up through, you had people who were competent, but they couldn't very well bid across into other court positions because they didn't have the door opener, the degree, the something that the judges would look at favorably. So that's what MSU offered, and we talked about developing curriculum. We talked about how it would work. We talked about a number of things, and I decided to go forward with it. I went with Marine to the other court organizations, the FCCA, and to the National Association of Court Managers, which is the state court group, and said, this is what we're going to do. Do you want an opportunity to participate? And our reception was sort of weak. I mean, we weren't well received. There was some institutional problems between the organizations. There was politics. There was NACM had started sort of their own little internal program, which was wonderful. It did give people training in certain areas, but there was no creditable certification. There was no degree. There was nothing, you know, and they didn't have the power and backing of a major university that would be able to transfer credits and other things. So we went forward, and I basically held a gun to their head and said, "I'm doing it. You can get on board or look out." And we ended up eventually getting all three organizations to come in, and they had only took a little while for them to figure out that politically we were swinging a big hammer. And that was I think the one thing that I did that helped the organization the most, at least into the future. I did a lot of little rock building and stuff up to that point, but I think that preserved not only the court system, but the employees, the ability of people to move. Now, I'm not talking just between the federal courts. I think with an MSU degree, they also would have the opportunity to go into the state court levels, county court levels, any other. So the net result is pretty huge.
It is indeed. Well, you've remained an interested observer, at least, of the NCBC, and continued your membership well beyond your presidency, I know. What do you see as some of the issues that are facing the NCBC now or will impact it in the future?
Well, obviously, budget is going to be a big one. No one knows as of this time exactly just how big that's going to be. There's going to be an austerity push. Congress is not going to let us get out from under the knife either. They're going to make it painful for everybody. The civilian agencies, everybody, the military. We're in a large deficit spending circumstance, and they're going to have to try to recover monies or save monies by not spending them. So that's going to hurt us. We don't know where we're going to go. I think we're well positioned to take that hit with ECMF, CMECF, there it is. Gosh, I've only gone 2 years and I can't get that acronym on. CMECF, and the things that it has been able to do for the court system as far as one person handling the volume of work that would have taken tens of people to do otherwise. The transfer of input from the court and the docketing processes to the bar association, things of that nature. So I think we're well positioned to absorb what will likely be some layoffs or at least some short funding. It's going to take some careful work on the part of the managers. It's going to take some effort and some understanding at the federal court administration level. And it may even force some rethinking through the entire court family, including the district court. If they're oiled and we're not, they may have to let money slide downward instead of it always going upward. But I think that's a big one. I think second generation, third generation CMECF, what it's going to be, how it's going to work out, is another. I mean, it could be something that makes our life a lot simpler. It could be something that changes the makeup of and structure of the courts. You hear people talking about kiosks for people to file bankruptcy, no longer having a public window for pro se filers, a lot of things that would really change how bankruptcy functions. We could become a mail order store type thing where you get a packet, you send it in, and depending upon how complex they want to make that process, you can never see a judge. You just get this piece of paper back saying that your debts are gone. I mean, I see those as things. But I think funding is the big one that's coming up, and that'll be upon us in the next year or so.
Having been a member of NCBC for so long, what do you hope for the future of the organization?
Well, I spent a good chunk of my life being an NCBC member and a member of the bankruptcy family. I hope we survive in some fashion. I think the NCBC is a viable organization. We have been fortunate, and I'm sure we will be fortunate in having good, strong candidates at the helm and at the other support positions. We'll just have to learn how to manage with what's presented to us. But the NCBC, I think, with the educational base, I think with the organizational structure, we have credibility at the administrative office. I mean, it would take a big thing to completely disband us, and I don't think we'll ever be incorporated into district court unless it's because of the kiosk aspect, where it's the district court doesn't have to deal with anything at all about bankruptcy. It's all, who knows, it may go tilt all the way around to the old referee thing where everything's being done off-site. Who knows? I'm not a seer. I don't know what that'll be, but I think that for the short term, next 10, 15 years, I think NCBC will be viable and contribute all, through it. Beyond that, gosh only knows what might happen. I think they're well positioned.
Yeah. Would you like to offer any suggestions or insights into where you think maybe the next generation of NCBC will be going and how they can further serve the membership?
Well, I think one of the things that happens in any organization is it evolves, it grows older, and if you don't have young, vibrant people coming in, I think the secret is to continue to recruit, continue to train, continue to make whatever the NCBC can be for people. Bringing in talent will keep it alive. If we just do social stuff and all the people grow old and no new members come in, it will disappear. It will become a used-to-be organization kind of thing. But I think it's important to recruit. And I think bringing in deputy clerks when they're hired, even if they're just 1 year temporary and a day kind of people. I used to tell my folks, I said, look, the NCBC is the only organization in the entire world that's working for you. There's nobody else out there. Don't get confused with the administrative office being your friend. It is truly not. There are some good people in the administrative office, but their job is to find some way to not have you around because of budget issues and other things. They're looking for ways to control us, shrink us, do away with us for all practical purposes. And there are other entities out there that have the same concept by their very charter. Their intent is to find better ways to do this so that you don't have that job anymore. It happened to us with all of the RIFs. When CMECF was a great thing and it was a sad thing. Because of CMECF, there were a lot of people who lost jobs. When one person can do the work of three, including the original opening, that used to be opening desk, front counter, then you had docketing and motions and all the other stuff that went through, then you had the discharge issues, then you had the adversary issues, depending upon how it was handled in different courts. Now you're talking 3 to 4 people working on a case. Now one individual does it all. So that created a circumstance where risks were obvious and the administrative office moved and forced that hand. I said, you don't need all these people because we're doing it electronically. We transferred all of the work to the attorneys. They're doing all the input. All you're doing is reviewing. So we've gone from actually being people who do things to just people who review things. And that's going to be a trend that I think will go forward into the future. You know, it's a good thing, yet it may be a bad thing if it hurts employment and takes people's jobs. But this is such an uncertain time in America that you know, nobody can look past the next 6 months really with any real ability to come close to coming out with an answer that matches what will happen.
Was one of our, dare I say, an elder statesman. Any other thoughts that you'd like to offer, looking backward and looking forward?
Well, I was one of the things I did do during my presidency was to create the Ralph T. Kelly Award. That was intended to be the Silver Star for the court system. And I have to say I was very surprised when it was awarded to me. Being the creator, Brenda Argo was the other one that had received it, now Richard Helsel, which I think was well-deserved. I think we have to look for people who do good things, and we should reward them. I think that, and I've lost my train of thought. We were doing what?
Looking backwards.
Looking backwards.
Forward.
Well, looking backwards is easy. I mean, I can see everything that happened looking back. I think the NCBC made some mistakes in its lifetime. Took the wrong position on something. Could have gotten a better result if we would have presented it differently. Looking forward, again, that's 6 months from now. I think the next 4 or 5 years, I think it's a good, strong, viable organization. I think there's good people in high places, and I think we'll be well served, but it's going to be painful with this reduction.
Well, education, advocacy, and leadership are the three pillars on which the NCBC is hung and on which they stand. And you have been a vital and integral part of all of that. And we appreciate your service and thank you for coming in and talking with me this morning.
My pleasure. My pleasure.